Greetings and salutations, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the OTT.X Webinar series, where it is our continued privilege to share with you the experience, insights, and wisdom from the people that are shaping the OTT CTV industry. As streaming platforms and channels continue to grow and are seeking scale, we're hearing more and more the need for data, information, and efficient means of getting at it. Managing the seemingly barrage of data and information without adequate systems and automation can leave you swimming in a sea of spreadsheets, disconnected reports, and very little real useful information. We're so excited about the work that organizations like our guest today are doing in this space to help solve these very issues. So joining us today, please welcome Matt Carter, VP, Head of Product for WIP Media at the next, who's going to lay some truths on us about what is being done, what they've done, and some ideas for solving some of these issues. Hi, Matt.
Hey, Eric. Thank you very much for the introduction. Hello, everyone. Indeed, so I'm going to take over now and share I have a presentation to walk you through. So hopefully that's now coming up on your screen.
Looks great.
Great. Okay, so yeah, hello, everyone. So welcome to the webinar. My name is Matt Carter. I'm the Vice President and Head of Product at WIP Media. As you can probably tell from my accent, I'm based in the UK. I'm based in London. So in today's session, we're going to discuss the topic of powering partner payouts in the age of FAST and AVOD. So let's go through the agenda for today. So first of all, we'll examine the background and some of the challenges in managing payments in this space. We'll then review like the typical end-to-end partner payment flow, starting with getting the data in, which we're calling here content performance tracking, managing all of the financial contractual terms, making sense of all of the data which is involved, and then performing the actual calculations, the royalty calculations, the payouts, and then actually reporting that to different content providers. And then lastly, we'll explore how WIP Media addresses these challenges of its own solution, followed by a wrap-up and Q&A. So let's start with a little bit of background. So the fast AVOD ecosystem involves multiple parties who can license, distribute, or play out content. So examples of this would be platforms who actually play out the content, the fast channel owners who might distribute their content and channels to platforms, and then there might also be content providers who actually provide the content to these channel owners. Now, these parties can monetize by selling ad space, and they can do this directly by partnering with an ad server and selling the ads directly. But quite often, this is outsourced to the partner platforms who do it and then pay them out a share of the revenue. There are also inventory share models where different parties sell different portions of the ad space, and that's also quite common. In the typical model I'm showing here on the slide, platforms will retain part of the ad revenue that they've sold themselves. They would share the rest with the channel owners, who then in turn need to calculate payments to their content providers. And these relationships between the different parties have very specific contractual agreements in terms of pricing, deductions, minimum guarantees, which I'll come on to shortly. So let's talk a bit about the challenges here. There's quite a few of them. So as I mentioned, these business models come with complex terms, revenue shares, minimum guarantees, deductions. This means trying to calculate any of these payment amounts manually would be a very time-consuming and I guess error-prone process. And this is made worse by the fact that the FAST and AVOD is a high-growth portion of our industry. And as a fast channel distributor expands its platform partnerships and increases its library of titles and increases the number of channels, this whole process just becomes more and more problematic. So the ability to have full traceability and auditability in this whole financial flow is actually really important, and it's just going to get harder and harder to achieve unless there's some kind of automation. The other key thing to consider here is that the reported data, the reported revenue and performance data which comes from these platforms comes in large volumes. And this data is also often fragmented and inconsistent, which further emphasizes the need to do this in an automated way. And really what we want is for a fast channel business to be able to focus on what they do best, which is their content, the quality of their content, curating that content, making sure the content performs well, rather than worrying about all of this kind of financial administration. So kind of just to go one step deeper into some of the pain points that we at Whip Media have seen in the space. So since fast channels have actually had to be spun up quite quickly, they've reacted very quickly in building kind of the customer facing portion of their service, the actual player and the user interface. And because it's such a booming industry, the kind of financial aspects of the back end of this whole process hasn't really seen the same level of effort or investment. And actually these financial processes and systems have been left behind, particularly for the kind of smaller companies. So that means that managing these new and growing deals and financial terms and growing data volumes is just getting harder and harder to do manually with limited staff. And it also means that as the need to become traceable and auditable increases, it's becoming even more difficult with all of these growing volumes. And the reporting challenges are huge. There are so many different sets of data, which we'll come on to in a moment. So handling this inbound data, these contracts, the actual statements that they need to provide to the content providers that they're paying, this just becomes all the more challenging. And it's kind of clear to see just from what I've said so far that there is a clear need for automation and scale. So let's now look at this from a more like a illustration point of view. So this diagram shows an example flow of the data, an example data flow of what's required for paying out content providers in this space. So we kind of go from left to right. So starting on the left-hand side, you have the data sources themselves. So these could be platforms. So in the world of FAST, this could be something like Pluto, Roku, Plex. It could also be ad servers, monetization servers like SpringServe and others. Or it could be fast technology providers like Amagi and Whirl and Otera, who actually schedule and host these live streams. But the data can come from different places, and that just depends on the deals that have been struck and how it's all being monetized. Now, the quality of this data is ultimately quite variable, and it needs to be aggregated into one place. It needs to be tidied up so that it can easily then align to a customer's title library, the titles that have been licensed from the content providers. And in turn, it also needs to be matched to the terms on the contracts. And only once this is all done can the royalties be calculated for those titles and for those content providers using those terms. And then once this is done, there's also then a strong need to create statements which can then be generated and ultimately distributed to the different content providers, which show very clearly how much money is owed for what titles and what channels. And only then can the actual payments themselves be initiated. And as you can see already, none of this is simple. There's lots of complexity involved. So let's walk through this step by step so we can make a bit more sense of it. So I'm kind of starting here with the initial stage, which is actually getting all the data in about the financial reporting and the performance reporting. So this is basically the left-hand side of that diagram. And as I mentioned already, I just want to re-emphasize this. The FAST ecosystem has lots of diverse stakeholders, content owners, channel providers, platforms, monetization systems. And while this industry is growing rapidly, there are still big inefficiencies really due to the amount of data, the fragmentation in the data, and the inconsistency in the data being shared between these parties. If we elaborate this one step further and give them examples, so the data can come in from multiple sources, but often it comes in different formats, has different structures, different file types. There's very rarely a standard identifier in a piece of reported data which says that this revenue report for this title points to this specific title in a customer's library. And actually getting hold of this data in the first place can be challenging. Sometimes the data can be downloaded from a specialist portal, which someone would have to do manually. But in many cases, this data is only available via an email that the customer receives from the platform. So actually the data collection side of it is also a huge headache. And platforms report data at varying levels of granularity. So in best case scenario, the data about the revenue and the viewership is at the title level, so the individual episodes or films that are being played out. But in some cases, all you would get is revenue at the channel level. So you may just get, this is the revenue for the channel for this period. And obviously, as the number of platforms increases, this becomes more and more labor intensive and error prone. So clearly there's a need to automate the aggregation and standardization of all this data into like a common structure, which can then be used as the basis to actually pay out the content providers. So let's now move on to the contractual side of things. And I've emphasized this already, but these fast AVOD deals can involve highly complex financial terms, and they can vary based on different factors. So there may be pricing models, which could be revenue shares. So there's a share of the revenue which goes out to the content provider. But equally, this could all be based on rate cards and rate card tiers, or it could be based on fixed fees. Now, it's not often this simple because sometimes these different pricing models or these different rates only apply to data which matches certain criteria. So this kind of revenue share split may only apply to fast. It may only apply to certain resolutions of content or certain genres of content, and it may only be applicable to, for example, certain territories that the content's played out in. So it's not as simple as one revenue share for the entire contract with the content provider. In addition to this, deductions are another big consideration. So those can apply at the title level, or it could be apply across the entire contract. This could be based on a percentage of the gross or net revenue, or it could be based on an actual cost that's incurred, in which case the costs themselves need to be considered here as well. Minimum guarantees as well are another layer of complexity, and those could be minimum guarantees across an entire contract, or they could be by title and specific to a specific season or a specific series or an individual episode. And then we've often found as well in our experience that often there are deductions that need to take place and go back to the platform. So platform or device specific revenue shares that need to be considered before any of these calculations can even be done. And those are across all contracts, right? So these aren't necessarily contract level deductions. It could be a broader global set of adjustments that need to be made before you even start looking at the royalties that are due. And this now leads me on to data complexities. And I think you've probably gathered from what I've been saying that there are quite a few things to consider here in terms of data. So it's one of the most critical parts and challenging tasks in the ecosystem that we found. So as a fast channel owner or fast service, it's first important to ensure that actually there's a clearly defined set of titles that you can relate things to. So these will be things like episodes and series and films and channels. So having that kind of canonical set of data really makes doing downstream calculations a lot easier. So this kind of title library is a key characteristic here. And then when you are managing your contracts, it should be clear which titles are licensed in each contract. So you can kind of create that link between a title and a contract. But then you have the performance data, which comes in from all the different platforms and ad servers and tech providers. And as I mentioned before, this data almost always lacks a consistent or standardized way of it being reported. So there is a clear need to be able to map this reported data to a customer's own list, own library of titles. So we know that this reported data from Plex, or this coming from a Margi, or this coming from this ad server, clearly is related to this channel or this title. And this means, and this is required so that you get a correct attribution of the revenue coming in. Another thing that we've seen as well, particularly when it comes to data granularity, so sometimes, as I mentioned before, this data comes in lump sum. And actually, in an ideal world, when you're reporting to content providers, you want to do it at the title level. So they want to know how individually how their titles are doing and how much they're getting paid out per title. But if it's coming in a lump sum, that's very hard to do. And that's why there is a need to do what we're calling allocations. So that's essentially breaking down this lump sum data to the title level using other data which is available, which could be things like the schedule for the channel or some viewership data that's also been ingested as well. And when working out what pricing to use, obviously you're not just matching on the title, you also have to look at what the business model is, what the date ranges are, what the languages, what the territories are, things like that. So all of that needs to be considered and matched to the contract to figure out exactly which pricing needs to be applied and how the royalty share should be calculated. And even the smallest mistake here can have really negative downstream effects, including incorrect payments and incorrect reporting to the content providers. Let's now move on to actually calculating the royalties. So let's assume that that data is as I described, it's done in a consistent way. But actually, when you're calculating the royalties, there are other considerations that need to be factored in. So obviously, different content providers may have their own reporting frequencies. Some want to be reported to monthly, maybe it's quarterly, maybe it's once a year, twice a year. So that's obviously something to consider. But also, when you're creating these statements, you also need to look at what's been paid previously. So tracking the prior balances, that's essential to ensure that what's already been paid is accurately accounted for. Another big thing that we found, and this is point 3 on the slide, is that what we found actually, some of the data just comes in late. You know, the revenue you get from a particular platform or data source may arrive several months after the actual activity period ended. So the revenue for Q2 may arrive at some point in Q3 or Q4. So this obviously makes the whole thing more challenging. So when figuring out what you want to include in a particular payment or statement to a content provider, there needs to be a way of knowing exactly what data is available for use, like the prior data, and also what activity period it relates to. So it would be very clear to the financial team that they could include this previous data in a future statement. So that kind of ability we found is kind of essential for this to work because of the delays that we see in how data is reported. Another thing that is important here is actually the way these payments are made. So quite often a fast channel owner doesn't want to make a payment to the content provider until they've been paid themselves. So they want to do back-to-back payments. So as well as being aware what the reported revenue is, it's also really important to know what the cash flow looks like. You know, what cash has been received by the fast channel owner. So only once that cash has been received should the payment be made. And actually, sometimes there are discrepancies between the reported revenue and the cash. And this obviously needs to be taken into account as well. So lots of different factors here to think about. And this is before you actually run the royalty calculations themselves. And that's when you're doing the splits and figuring out the MGs and figuring out all the deductions. We need to think about all of these other things as well. And this kind of finally leads me on to the actual reporting side. So this is essentially telling the content provider how much they're owed. And as a general rule of thumb, you know, these statements obviously need to be accurate, but being able to make these as transparent as required is also important. So these statements should ideally show revenue breakdowns at the title level, along with being able to roll things up to, you know, the entire contract level or the channel level. They should show the MGs, minimum guarantees that are relevant and how close they are as well. Any deductions which have been applied, any prior payments and balances should be included there. And really, this whole thing should be automated. You want to streamline this through automation. The statement should be automated and delivered ideally to the content provider without any manual interaction. However, what we've found is that it's a completely legitimate scenario to have let's say a review and approval step in the workflow. So before something gets automatically pushed out or a payment made, there could be a facility to enable a review and approval from the distributor before anything is actually done. Another key consideration here, as I mentioned at the start, is auditability. Now, it's quite common that a content provider, they get this statement, they know how much they're owed, but actually they want to understand, how was that calculation made? Show me the raw numbers that led you to this calculation. You know, I want to understand why this is the case. So if this was automated in a system, it means that all of the underlying calculations that were made, and those could be using internal things like cash and revenue, but also things like ad impressions, viewership, if you're doing allocations. All of that could then be exposed in a more detailed report, which could also be provided to the content provider if it was required. So having that kind of auditability, traceability is extremely important here as well. Okay, so I think, Eric, this might be a good time to have a brief pause. The next stage of this was me talking about the solution that Whip Media has and how we address some of these concerns. But maybe this is a good opportunity to see if there's any questions from anyone.
Absolutely. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, if you've got questions and you've joined us today, please feel free to drop them into the question bin or into the chat. I'll be happy to get to them there. It's amazing to me, Matt, the amount of complexity in this space. The deals that our business development folks are coming up with and all the crazy stuff that they've decided that they're going to bake into them. I'm sure they're really proud of themselves for that. But as a former finance person and ops person myself, I can definitely imagine the poor folks trying to wrangle with all of those different deals and get data and in any kind of timely way, so you can actually use it, report on it, and make sure that you're paying the right amounts and you're getting paid the right amounts. And it's probably changing all of the time as well.
Yeah, it is. We're seeing, more and more platforms, more and more data sources coming up all the time as the ecosystem grows. And that obviously that's new data coming in. We're seeing new types of deals being done. So, we have to look at, what different types of contractual terms could be applied. And then, step one is making sure the data is good, it's clean, it forms the basis of everything. Then it's tackling the actual contracts that you have with your content providers, and then automating these calculations. And yeah, it's something we've been doing for many years now. And actually, what I'm about to go on to is actually our fast track product. And we've from having worked with large customers, medium customers, and a number of smaller fast channel operators, there's lots of lessons that we've learned, and we've been able to really find these different minute different things to consider, and we've built a product out of it. So
yeah. So if I'm at a small or medium-sized operator, a channel, do you find that it's you can adapt your platform to the deals as they're being developed and these new terms are coming up, or that you kind of feel like you want to be working alongside those the creation of those deals to help maybe inform what gets done and maybe give some guidance on that and the feasibility, I guess.
yeah, so one of the things we've made sure to do in this space is to partner with all of the big players, and what we found is that if you're a small to medium company and you're spinning up your fast channels, you're going to go to one of the big guns in the area, like an Amagi, Terra, or Whirl, because they really allow you to bootstrap spinning up your own service. And they would take care of a lot of the pain, the scheduling, ingesting the content, playing out. So what we've done is we work very closely with those providers to understand what kind of deals are being done. So we like to kind of be a bit ahead of the curve and make sure our product has the it supports the correct deals that our customers are likely to strike in the future.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, so that's an interesting partnership for us, definitely.
Very cool. It's terrific seeing the tech companies in this space, and actually all OTT.X members as well, working together to efficiently solve problems for the content providers and for the platforms. It can be it's a lot to try to take on, and I think if we can all focus on, to some extent anyway, kind of stay in our lanes, we can offer the most affordable and best solutions. I'm curious about, and maybe you'll get to this in the next segment, Matt, but the identifiers that are being used. I'm pretty familiar with IDER and
Mhm.
some of the industry efforts around standards and things like that. Are you seeing any of that in the reporting that you're, or the data that you're receiving, and then the reporting that you're generating with it?
Actually, quite rarely. Actually, it's interesting. So our fast channel distributors, our customers, they quite often either have their, if they're, they've been doing this for a little while, they'll have their own internal identifiers that they use, which
Sure.
is obviously becomes the number one identifier that we work with. But if you're just starting up, what we find sometimes, if you're working with like Amagi, for example, Amagi has its own identifiers, and quite often they may kind of inherit those identifiers, and that's quite helpful because Amagi would provide a lot of the data. So actually, they're going to match one to one, which is very helpful. Um, but yeah, in terms of standardization, yeah, it's either a bespoke ID that the client's using, or they use something coming from a fast technology provider. Occasionally, you get things like IMDb IDs and things like that. But what we
Mhm.
found, particularly with these smaller companies, is a lot of this content's quite niche. It's very specialist content, and it's not necessarily the content that you'll find on IMDb or TVDB. It's not
Yeah,
necessarily a well-known series. So actually, kind of standardizing these things becomes quite challenging, actually.
yeah, I can imagine. All right, cool. Well, are you ready to
Yeah,
take us into the next chapter here, Matt?
sure. Yeah, this is a bit of a shameless promotion of our products, but yeah, I
Bring it.
let's do it. Okay, so how can WIP Media, our company, help to address these challenges that we've been going through? So um, let's now talk about Fast Track. So the Fast Track product basically comes in two offerings. You can see the left and right boxes there. So on the left, the track portion focuses on the content performance tracking that I mentioned earlier. So this is providing the customer the ability to manage their titles, having like a title library, and then being able to automatically collect, aggregate, and normalize all of this viewership and revenue data from all these different sources, having it all in one place, standardized, being able to then associate that to the titles, and then being able to report on it. Just being able to report on this cluster of data from different sources and being able to see nice, clean reports and dashboards of how your channels, how your content is performing across all the different platforms and territories. That is a hugely valuable offering in itself. So that's why it's sold as a module in itself. And then if you move on to pay, which is the right hand side, think of this as like an extension to track. So this handles the payout side, the financial side. So this enables the customer to manage their contracts that they have with the different partners and entering those financial terms. It uses the data that is captured in track to then as the basis for the royalty calculations and the payment tracking. And it then can produce statements which are then delivered to the content providers. And we've actually developed our own kind of standard statement format, which we think is a great kind of industry standard for reporting on. And as I said, these modules together work to provide that kind of end-to-end flow for the partner payouts. So if I dive in slightly more detail, this is probably a nice way of representing it in different modules. So again, if we kind of go from left to right, the first portion here, which is performance tracking and title management. So this is all about the collection and ingestion of all the different data. We actually use machine learning to recognize different types of reports. We understand who the reports came from, what kind of data is contained in them, how granular they are. So that means we can easily classify them and ingest them into the correct place, into the correct part of our structure. And what we've also found is actually getting the data in the first place, from these different portals is a huge overhead for our customers. So one of the things we do is we offer robotic process automation, which is basically um, automating what someone would do manually in the web browser. So rather than having to go and log into this portal, find the correct report and download it, that can all be automated. So we download the data from the portals automatically. We can also get it from email inboxes or APIs. So this means that customers don't need to worry about getting the data in the first place, and they don't need to worry about all the different reporting formats that are available, because essentially we've built transformations which can understand all these different data sources and get them into one common standard which the customer can then use. What we're also then doing here is mapping this data to titles. So we know that this reported data from Amazon Freevee corresponds to this channel, or this particular title from Roku corresponds to this title in your library. And this is really key, as I said before, because we need to make sure the correct revenue is applied to the correct titles. The other thing our system can do is allocations. So as I said before, when there's only lump sum data being reported, our system can break it down and break it down to the title level. And to do that, in order to do that, we use other data which is available. So we could ingest the channel schedules or the viewership data as well, and we can use those kind of percentages to break down that lump sum revenue to the title level. So then we have title level kind of revenue. The next part is contract management. So we've gone through this, but we have a contracts module where all of these financial terms, the revenue shares, the fees, the guarantees, the deductions, all of that can be modeled in our system. And everything can be applied at either the contract or the title level. We can also support the various custom attributes that need to differentiate it for different territories and different business models. So there's a flexible contracts module there where all of those contracts with the different partners can be managed. So once that's kind of done, the next step is actually licensing and attributing data. So the titles, which I mentioned in part one, they can be linked to the contracts. And then because the titles then have the reported data, those titles are also then linked to the contracts, and that means we're able to figure out which title corresponds to which pricing model based on the reported data. So then we have all of the information we need to run these royalties. So we can run these workflows, taking into account all of the different contractual terms, and then produce statements. And these statements can be approved and reviewed, but ultimately they can be automatically distributed to the different content providers, whether it's on a monthly, quarterly basis. And because we are producing the statements, we can also automate the actual payments themselves. So we've done integrations into different financial or ERP systems. We can push accounting entries or journal entries into these systems to trigger the relevant payments. So we can even automate the payment side of it as well. And then at the end of this, the system provides lots of analytics and reports and dashboards. So it's really easy for you to drill into the kind of underlying data and figure out what's going on. So just a few shots here before we kind of wrap up. So this is an example of a dashboard, and this is clearly showing the data which is coming in, and this is showing a nice aggregated view of the revenue and performance across different business models. In this case, it's FAST and AVOD. But you can see here that you can see things broken down by channel or by territory. So this all updates in real time. This is a really nice way of seeing at a glance exactly how the business is performing in terms of how things are playing out on different platforms. But once this data is all in place, we then have a capability to allow users to trigger these statements to generate these reporting periods. So when they do that, and this is something I alluded to earlier, actually, because data comes in late, it's really useful to see what data is available from the different places. We may have data which is several months old, but you can select it here because it's all grouped by activity period. You can select the revenue, or it could be deductions as well. And then you can then apply these to your statement period. You can say, okay, these are all relevant for November 2024. And then all of that data will then be used when generating these statements for all of the different contracts you have. And then when you run the calculations, what we have is a workflow view. So you can see for every contract, for every content provider, you can see what's actually happening. So you can see that we're taking in the data, we're performing the calculations, processing minimum guarantees. We then generate a draft of the statement, which can then be approved here. So you can see there's like an approval step here. And then before it's approved, after it's approved, it can then be sent on to the content providers. So I wanted to kind of wrap up this portion and the webinar. So let's kind of recap some of the kind of key benefits and kind of key considerations here. So what's important? Well, being able to manage all of the contractual terms in a centralized place, pricing models, deductions, MGs, guarantees, being able to manage those in one system is very important. Being able to take in all of the different data from the different places and being able to report on it at the title level is also critical. And as you've probably seen, doing this all manually would be a nightmare for anyone. So the automation really is the key part of all of this. So getting the data in from the data sources, collecting it, processing it, tidying it up, mapping it, attributing it to licenses, running the calculations and delivering the statement. All of that can be automated, particularly with our solution. And what this means is as the business changes, as you have new channels, new titles, new platforms, whatever it may be, you don't have to go through a major bit of rework. You don't have to do everything from scratch. You can easily apply these new contracts or apply these new platforms to the system, and everything will just seamlessly flow through. And if you needed to audit, do an audit of everything, all of the data is available in the system. So you don't have to look through endless spreadsheets to find it all. You can find it all, all in one place. So really, that's what I wanted to cover. So if you want to know more about Fast Track, feel free to get in touch with me or anyone from the Fast Track team. We'd love to talk to you about it more or give you a demo.
Fantastic. Thanks, Matt. It's as I mentioned, it's really fantastic seeing the work. I know you've been doing this. How long has Fast Track been a product at WIP?
Yeah, so we've actually been doing content performance tracking and payments for a long time, for many years, with lots of customers. But obviously, Fast has exploded quite recently in the last couple of years. So this particular offering, which has has all of the facilities for Fast deals, that's been around for around a year and a half now.
Okay.
But the nice thing about it was that it was a natural evolution of our existing platform, which was handling other business models like SVOD and TVOD and things like that.
Yeah, building on a really solid foundation. I know that y'all have been doing that for a very long time. And reporting is, it seems like when you're doing a deal or you're getting started, you're going to have all this information. We've got all this information, right? But actually turning it into something that you can use. It starts off, I think, in a business, you start off with, okay, great. We've got some deals. How fabulous is that? We're, lighting cigars and drinking champagne or something. But then, then you have to manage your business, and all of that data is coming in, and then you're trying to organize it yourself in spreadsheets. And so then normalizing it, turning this field into the one that looks like it from this other platform. And well, you don't really have this on that one platform. So you're going to augment that. And then your whole point about allocating, it just keeps getting more and more complex. And, what I've always felt like is if you're getting into this space now, or you're considering getting into this space, this is the time to start thinking about your data sets, not when you're 10,000 feet in the air and you're pulling your hair out and your plane's on fire and it's going down because you don't have any visibility to what's actually going on. So the sooner the better, I think, in a business, to try to normalize your reporting, your data sets, and it's gonna make your life a lot easier, and you'll be able to focus on doing the things that you really got into this business to do in the first place anyway.
Yeah, exactly. I couldn't have said it better myself. That's spot on.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Matt. And thanks to WIP also. Great partners and friends of OTT.X, and just great people all in all. We really appreciate your support of OTT.X and our whole community and for the whole industry as well. Thanks so much for being a part of it. And thanks to all of you, our dear audience, for attending and for your continued support of OTT.X. As always, the session was recorded and it'll be available on the OTT.X website at OTTX.org, along with an impressive collection presentations from our online and in-person events over the last few years. We'll be back with another episode in a month or so. Keep an eye on where we're at on the website. Actually, I want to check that out myself. When are we online again? I don't know that it's actually on the calendar. So check it out. We'll get that information out to you as soon as we can. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. That concludes our webinar for today. Enjoy your Thanksgiving if you're celebrating that, and we'll talk to you really soon.
Thank you.